Cool. Can I start by trying to pronounce your surname? Because I've been very, very excited to give this
Oh,
a
please
shot.
do. Oh, please do. I'm so interested.
Because my assumption here, and I might need to cue a laugh track somewhere in case it goes really bad. But my
Okay.
my guess is that it's Ambroziewicz.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Nice, cool. So is it like Polish by origin or?
Yeah, it's Polish by origin. It's Ambroziewicz because the
Ooh,
the
nice.
ZI it's gets softened in
Hmm.
Polish if it goes together. So CZ it's a ch sound. So
Yeah,
that's
cool.
pretty
And then
much what it
is
is.
is Jan also a Polish name? Or where does
Mm-hmm.
that? Cool.
Yeah. So Jan is John, pretty much.
Oh, nice.
John or Jonathan or Hans or Johann
That makes a lot of sense because
in
I was
German
wondering
speaking
because
languages.
I'm originally from Germany and Jan is quite a popular name in like German, but I guess I never made the connection that it's yeah the link there is then John, but that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of my surname pronunciation. The intonation was a little wrong, but at least the lettering was good. But cool, yeah, Jan, thanks so much for being on the OfferZen podcast. It is really cool to get the chance to chat.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So I've prepped a few rapid fire questions which you haven't seen or prepared for, just to try to not to catch you off
Mm-hmm.
guard, but to get a little bit of insight into who you are. They are they're very easy, so just don't think about them too
Mm-hmm.
hard. Say what comes to mind. First question is:
Okay.
after a really tiring day, how do you spend your evening?
Oh, well, I usually watch something or like I abuse Netflix and video streaming. So that's one option. And the other option is if I'm not totally tired, I would do I would play some music, meaning like I would play instruments because I do play
Which is
instruments
probably
in my
why
free time.
you're nearly one-upping me on your recording setups. That's that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a nice side effect of doing that.
cool. So for the audio people who aren't looking at the video, it's just got a very nice microphone and a pop filter, so that's quite cool. And then tea or coffee?
A coffee, like coffee 100% and black and no sugar. Pour over stuff. Yeah, pour over stuff. Uh 4 or 5 a day.
Nice. And then what's a really good book that you've read recently?
So actually it's a book that is very related to my job, and it's about tech people and organizing tech teams, and it's called Dynamic Reteaming.
Ooh.
Um so it kind of um maybe not criticized, but discusses the with the assumption that teams should be stable at all times because the practice shows that they are not stable because people come and go for a different job, for a different opportunity. Teams grow, priorities change. So actually, the author of the book, she's been a web developer
Hmm.
or designer, one of the startups that later on became I think like one of the uh, webinar tools like GoToWebinar or something like that. Might be wrong, but she was a member of a team, and then she kind of got interested in analyzing that, and she brings a lot of kind of interviews with different practitioners, different specialists from the tech industry about how did they experience changes in their teams or growing their teams or change or like splitting them in general, like how to manage, how to tackle and not be afraid of reteaming, how she calls it.
I will link that in the show notes for sure. I think that is a very interesting sounding book. And then, what is something you wish existed but doesn't?
Mm, I don't know, or there is a lot of things like that. I'm not sure, like food that doesn't make you fat. I'm not like that's stupid, but
Nope. I think
it's one of the things that would be so
yeah.
awesome.
I think those things of like nutrition pills or Soylent don't cut it for me because I'm like I don't want to like get the nutrients in and not be able to eat like a burger or a pizza. So if you could like combine that
Yeah.
somehow, that would be super helpful.
And at the end of the day, it's like still if you eat a ridiculous amount of Soylent or something alike, you still will gain weight because that's how we are built. So
I wonder if it's like a case of taking all the nutrients out of food so that there's nothing to it anymore and you just get the flavor. I don't know if there's I don't know, I'm probably digging into this way too hypothetically. We should maybe just leave it as a wish.
Yeah, well, diet soda, like I'm not sure if it's
the same
healthy, but definitely it's devour of any nutritional value whatsoever.
Yeah. Cool. Then moving on. What is something that you're glad you said no to recently and why?
So I wouldn't phrase it as saying no. I would kind of phrase it more or position it more as like being true to myself at all times, because like in the past, in all of my past jobs, I used to be sort of like I was leaning to the opinion of other people a lot for, I don't know, like validation, or they were more senior, or I wasn't believing in myself that much or enough to basically kind of make my own judgment. And recently I'm kind of like I'm challenging myself to make my own judgment, but also like be respectful of everybody. And there were a couple of situations like that, I guess, within Codility, within like, I don't know, like talking with friends about important topics in, I don't know, the life of the society or like the world we live in. So yeah. Sometimes I said no, and that was like, I was afraid that I might be like judged or rejected or questioned about it. But then I was like, yeah, I did good because I was true to myself.
Very interesting. And then as a last question, what is something that's cost you less than $50, but was the best investment most recently?
Less than $50. Actually, well, I always, so when I record some music, I always had like this microphone, but I just handheld it. And there is an arm, like an extension that is just screwed to the table, and it was dead cheap. It was like $10, like 20 PLN, or sorry, 40 PLN. So it's like 20, so it's like $10 US dollars, dead cheap. And it came with all of this, so the pop filter and everything. It's a bit geeky, but yeah, it was one of the best purchases I made in terms of gadgets and useful equipment.
I think that experience is coming my way. I literally ordered an arm for myself today. So like no more handheld mics for me, and I'm looking forward to the same sort of experience.
Definitely you can get something more expensive and very pro.
For sure.
But this one was like from eBay, literally from a seller that I didn't know, and I wasn't sure about the quality, but actually it does its job. So it's
yeah. So my little price comparison as well was like, what if I can hire my roommate to hold the mic while I'm recording? But mic arms still ended up being cheaper, so I went with that. But cool. Thanks for the intro to you. That was really interesting. And then, so just to sort of contextualize a little bit, I think you already mentioned you work at Codility. You're a senior PM there, but just a little bit of insight into like Codility as a company. What kind of problem does it solve, just for people who haven't heard about it before?
Okay, so we work in the realm of tech hiring, which means hiring software engineers, especially software engineers. It's not all of the engineering in the world, but we're definitely focused on everything software. And what I would say is like we streamline the tech hiring process. So in other words, we provide an all-in-one tool where you can screen, assess, and then interview candidates for positions at your company.
And then briefly, like what is that? How do you go about solving that with software? Like what role does software play in solving that problem?
So that's a very interesting story, because like when you join Codility, usually at some point you meet the founder, Greg, and he always tell his story when he worked in China for a tech company, and they were they made a decision, or the business wanted the team to grow significantly, and he, as an engineer on the team, he realized at some point that he just spends all the time interviewing candidates and looking at like manual assessments and making sense out of it, and then making decisions. And at like doing that, while doing that, there is not much time or effort left for actually building new software. So that's what spawned the idea. So it was a bit about saving time on evaluating potential candidates. It was about being able, like, giving the candidates a tool to demonstrate their skills, but also make it automatic, so that it's, or like reasonably automated, so that it doesn't take that much of an effort to manually review everything. Now, if you think of the process of recruiting somebody, you usually have those steps that, regardless of the role, are pretty similar.
Yeah.
So you have sourcing, you have screening, you have then certain type of tasks that assess your skills, and an interview, or a combination of those, like interview that is focused on a certain skill, multiple interviews, and then you make a decision to actually present an offer to somebody, and then hire them or not. So what we have right now is basically a suite of tools that you can put in all of those stages when you think of hiring software experts. You can source candidates, and that's the code challenges part. We call it code challenges. You can screen candidates and give them like an assessment of basic stuff that you expect from them in their role, and that's called code check. It's pretty much an automatically assessed task that you perform, or a set of tasks that you perform at home, and then you send. Then you kind of you submit it, and the recruiter and the hiring manager, they see the result, and they can kind of plug that into the whatever tool they use for managing the pipeline, the recruitment process. And then finally, we have a tool for pair programming, which also has an IDE, and it's a working IDE. So you can basically use it as, instead of Google Hangouts or Zoom, and without screen sharing, you get everything you need for a technical interview. So you have the people that talk with each other. You have a whiteboard with for prepared for coding in a certain language. And then you have a console that gives you output of whatever you put in the editor. So yeah, so to summarize, it's a series of products that kind of make each of those steps a bit easier, a bit more streamlined, a bit more candidate oriented as well, because we want it to be we introduced recently a bunch of tools that remove bias, for instance. So there is a way to actually look at the report without any information whatsoever that would indicate race, gender, age, ethnicity, any kind of like any topic that actually could be a subject of an unconscious bias on the part of the reviewer. So that's Codility.
So then, for you as someone who works with the product, what is particularly interesting about that problem in software? Like, what excites you about solving that problem with software?
Well, how to put it? It's like everything is interesting, and everything poses a challenge. So if you think of assessing things automatically, you could say, all right, if you write a computer program, if it executes, if the tests or test cases that you put as the matter of the assessment, like the foundation of the assessment, they check out and they are okay, they pass. You could say that's it. Yeah, 100%. You're off to an interview. Like, we know that you have basic coding skills, but the reality is that the whole science of making sure that this assessment actually tells you something, not just about the ability to do this particular task, but also to be able to tell, like, does it tell the full story about your skills? Is it a good sample of the things that you can do? Is it is it good enough to say that you will perform
Right.
well at your new job? All of those questions are like there's no good answer for that. We're pursuing it, we're trying to research it, but that's the challenging part, right? That's the most interesting part, actually. So we passed the point where we actually can do some automated things with whatever the solution that the candidate submits to our system, but then there is this whole next chapter of making sure that it tells something else than just being able to the ability to solve a test. Yeah, I mean, it's serious. We in some cases we might be the deal breaker of somebody getting a job or not getting it. So
Yeah, amazing. And then how, just out of interest, like how big is your tech team roughly? Like what kind of engineering team size are you looking at?
so the tech team, let's say the core part is about 40
Mhm.
people, a little short of 40 people, including product and engineering. And then we have two kind of separate communities of contributors that create the content for for the platform. So that's also another fact about Codility. We're a platform that allows you to run code and then do automated assessments of what people can do with it. But also we offer tasks that help you look for those
Yeah.
skills, like check for
Yeah.
those skills. And we have two communities that actually do that. One is more oriented on the fundamental coding skills, algorithmic skills, and the other one is more like real life stuff, building web applications, working with APIs, with cloud services. So that would be bigger, but the core, like the people that we would consider like traditionally the product engineering team, that would be short of 40
Cool.
people.
Still pretty big. So this is almost foreshadowing our conversation coming up in any case, but just a like elevator pitch. And this probably comes from a place of like roles change from company to company, but just briefly, like what
Mhm.
part do you play in that mission? Like what is some of your main responsibilities as a senior product manager?
Okay, so um, I always like to think about it that, I mean, we actually had that um, conversation when I joined Codility, and I was asked a similar question, and I remember that we settled for something like the product manager at Codility makes sure that the product happens right, that it happens in the right direction, and it also, like, we make sure we help the engineering teams and the designers and the QA people, everybody that actually is involved in this process, to collaborate and to collaboratively make decisions. So in other words, we're not an omnipotent uh, decision maker as a position, as a role at the company. There is a huge component to actually make sure that we work well with teams, that we care about how the team is working together, how well do they understand the big picture, the kind of so-called product vision, and then how do that vision translates into things that we build each and every day. But to determine like what are those things, that's largely a common effort, a collaborative effort. So it's a mix of, yeah, it's, you would call, like, we do a part which, like, if you think of like Scrum teams, we would be the product owner. So we make sure that there is a backlog of things to do, that they have value for the company, for the customer, for the candidate. So all the personas that actually are either users or stakeholders in the Codility ecosystem. And then we also collaborate hands on with what everything that happens within the team. So we're not like, we are not looking from far away. We're kind of involved in everyday work.
Cool. So you've already mentioned that Codility helps build strong remote workforces, and your role as a senior product manager has been defined somewhat by remote work as well. Be it from a technical or a product perspective, or even like a people or a leadership perspective. And what we're going to dive into as well, and I'd like to unpack this, is, you've got a background in design management and psychology, and I'd like to use some of those as springboards to better understand how you define, or how you have defined, your role as a product manager at Codility, and some of the ways that you approach that on like a very practical day-to-day basis in a remote environment. So just to start, can you tell me more about your this design management and psychology background? Like, where do those come from?
Okay, so it stems from my formal education. I graduated from psychology, and I did a master's degree in a branch of social psychology, which is called environmental psychology. But it doesn't, and like, contrary to what people think, it's not related to, like, ecology and sustainability. There is a part of that, but it's much more about working with the environment of people. So it's also about the cities, urban settings, architectural spaces, and stuff like that. Um, there is, without going into too much detail, because it doesn't. I mean, there are parts that obviously, like, have something to do with what I'm doing right now,
Yeah.
but I think the interesting part of my of that background is that there was a lot of there was an equal emphasis put on both the theoretical part, but also applied skills. So if you study environmental psychology, you'll learn a lot about negotiation, mediation, facilitating group activities, group dynamics. One of the core career paths that you can pursue is being a negotiator in environmental disputes, like investors versus activists in urban settings when they want to build something, and there are things that stay in counter of doing in such a construction in a particular place. So that kind of thing, it gives you a nice mix of knowledge about research methodology, and that's pretty much universal. It works pretty much the same way in physics, in social sciences, in software development, and kind of doing user research, for instance. There's a lot of methods that they're actually the same methods. I won't even say like they're similar. They're actually the same methods. Anthropology. So that was one part of it. The other part was those you call them soft skills in very specific situations, like being a negotiator, being a mediator, and facilitating activities in groups, doing social deliberation, which is like large scale decision making. All of those things, they have different names in the tech industry, but all of them, they happen daily in what we do. So we do research with users. We do work in cross-functional teams. There is a number of things that you have to know about how a team works to be able to kind of be better every day. Let's put it this way, right? So all of those, like, if you look at agile software development methods, they have iterative cycles. They have reflecting on what we've been doing and how can we improve in the next iteration, in the next phase, or during the next sprint. All of those things, like, they come from foundations that somewhat originate in what I've been studying as well. So that's pretty useful. And then design and management, it's kind of the first things that I did professionally. I initially started in marketing and social media. I was kind of like a one-stop shop. So I was working with first I was working at a bookstore. So I was doing social media for them, and then book sales, and then like cultural events at the place, because it was like an event space as well. Then I moved. Then I actually started working at a tech company, but as an employer branding person. So again, doing a lot of things, being able to, I don't know, design a simple thing for social media, for like an image for a post, and then write copy for it, and then post it, and then be able to measure whether it's actually working or not. So that's kind of my applied my story of kind of learning, and then learning by doing, and then actually working in those fields. And then the last but not least, I think that's kind of like my recent realization, and it also so I was inspired by one of the product kind of people that are known in the product world, and Anthony Murphy. Um, he wrote an article that a product manager should be a generalist, and that's pretty much like what I think about it. So I think like if you want to be a successful product manager, you have to be an expert in being a generalist. That means that you acknowledge that you won't ever be an expert in any particular discipline, but you will be respectful and persistent, and actually you will learn a lot of things to a level that they actually so that you
Hmm.
can move comfortably around those fields. And from an individual perspective, I think that's very important in being a product manager. So of course, like you have to, like your main goal is to lead the product into a good direction, make sure that it's actually built and released and shipped to customers, gather feedback, know the needs of the customer, know the customer inside out, know the users inside out. That's usually that might sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes it's not. So like be able to differentiate between all of those things. But at the end of the day, in terms of like your personal toolkit, your box with tools that you need, I think it's that. So you have to be able to navigate a lot of different things with a lot of respect, with a lot of well, you cannot be a beginner. You have to kind of invest time and effort into learning a lot of things, but you also have to accept that you won't be this what we call a subject matter expert in any of those.
So what was, I mean, from employer branding, what was the like pivotal moment of moving train tracks from that to product management? Like what was your journey into that?
Oh, so I worked there for a couple of months, actually like 3 or 4 months, and then I got an opportunity from a friend who was he was a former journalist, and back then he worked in kind of public relations with government organizations, and actually
Oh, cool.
I got an offer from him to join his project and do stuff with him. So that was totally like, it was also like related to social media with like content creation, and we started doing that, and then we also decided that we want to make it a business, and we wanted to do like sophisticated infographics and do like get, for instance, like content from reports from public companies that they publish each, like every quarter or each year, and then make it into something that actually is digestible for a regular person and not boring to death. So that was our aspiration, but I think at the time it was what, like 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Like at that time, I don't think there was enough of a market for those things. So then I split, and basically like he continued working in that field. I split, and I landed a job in project management at a software agency. So that was kind of my entry point to actually building software, not being in like around or in within the tech bubble, but actually working with a technical team and building software. And it's kind of took off from there. So there was a couple of small projects. Then there was a bigger one. Then there was a customer that came, and the idea they had grew so much, and the need for like people and teams and like collaboration grew so much within the company, that I became there. That was my only customer that I was working with, and I became sort of a proxy product owner for them. Uh, and then I said, yeah, that's something for me. That's something that I want to do. And all of the next jobs I actually did were in product management specifically.
I think it's so something you said last time we spoke, and I really like the way you phrased it there, was like you never gunned for like product management specifically, but you sort of acquired all the little pieces of the job that you enjoyed until it was product management. Like you enjoyed this thing and doing this thing, and it eventually evolved into
that's true. Like somebody asked me before I actually read the Ant Murphy's article, and I had a conversation right before like February this year. Somebody asked me like, how do you start a career in product management? And I was like, hell, I know. I have no idea. I'm doing it, but
be a book salesman and do their social media.
Like I haven't noticed. I haven't like orchestrated it, like that wasn't my intention. Like I was just pursuing things that at the time were interesting for me, and it ended up being product management. So yeah.
That's really cool.
Messy truth.
I'd like to dive before we dive into some of the more like practical approaches you've taken as a product manager with like these impacts of remote work. Like I just want to understand a bit better some of your team's requirements and constraints in a remote setting. So sort of basically set the problem area there. Like what were the kinds of challenges or constraints for your team in this more like remote setup?
Okay, so I think it's in at Codility. What is important is that in March, when we were in the middle of a pandemic, we made a conscious decision as a company to move to a 100% remote setting, irrevocably, permanently. There is no coming back. Like if you need an office space, it will be for people. That was like if you needed an office space, that would be if you didn't have conditions to do that at home. You don't have a place to set up, a desk with a computer, with a screen, whatever you need. If you have difficulties with that, the company will help you, and you will have an office space. Otherwise, basically everybody works remotely. The company has to kind of adapt new ways of doing that. So having said that, we actually had to learn a lot of things, and we also had to bring a lot of experiences from other places. Because Codility, for 10 years as it's been a company, it always has been a co-located space. It always has been an office. When I joined the company, I think that was the office that everybody liked most. We were at a space that nobody knew there were offices in, and that was the Warsaw University Library. It's a modern building. It's like 90% of the surface area is the library itself, but there is some commercial space and there is some office space as well. So I joined there, and that was like, it was a shock for many people because not everybody counted on like moving to a remote setting. Fortunately, there were a lot of people that actually did that before. I also had some experiences. So for my team, what we did at some point was that we actually kind of did a very maybe a bit chaotic, but like we shared all the things that we know so that we immediately can pick from that repository of ideas, things, experiences, and we can implement something that works for us. And it's easy to say, well, you have to use collaboration tools like, I don't know, Slack or Microsoft Teams, or you have to do conference calls using whatever tool is your favorite, or that everything has been happening remotely even before, because we have offices in Europe and the United States, so we still have been like, we were remote already. And that's not actually how it works, because there was a lot of things that are totally counterintuitive that you haven't been like, there is a lot of safe, I don't know how to call that, like there is a lot of things that happen by itself when you are at the same space physically, and you have spontaneous interactions. And let's say that you don't have to be that explicit when you write a message to something, or you write an email, because you can always get up and go to that person and clarify, right? That doesn't happen in remote work. And you might say, okay, but you can also you can also call them and explain that quickly. But calling them is not that, like, there is the friction is, that's my interpretation, but I think the friction of like doing a call is bigger, is more significant than just getting up and speaking to somebody that's a desk away. So my team basically had to we had to train ourselves in being explicit while writing things, being sure that we like report back to each other, not in a managerial sense, but like in a sense that, like, if you tell somebody that you're doing something and they're waiting, check back with them and see, like, is it done? Do you need more time? Like, be very explicit about that. Um, that kind of verbosity in communication is by no means, it's not intuitive at all. So that's one of the things that we had to learn. Then, well, we had a collaboration space in sort of like a task board, a to-do board in online. We're not using any of the kind of project management suites for it. We just have like a document-based tracking, which is, like, we have checkboxes and we tick off the checkboxes, and that's been working for us. But then we realized that we have to be a lot more. We have to be clear as possible while writing those things, because if somebody is in doubt, like, that will be the place where they will be looking for an answer. So that's that. And on the team level, I
mean,
think,
if we can just pause there for a sec to touch on, because I think that's interesting. So, like, what does being clear mean? Because I think my assumption is that there are many ways of doing that. Like, you could either just like brain dump like pages in order to make your point really clear, or you can distill it into like a few words. But like, both of those probably have their use cases. But like in your case, like, what was, and I think it sort of overlaps between whether you're communicating via a message that you make sure your verbose or your clarity there is really intentional, or with your like project management system through your documents, that you, as you just said, clarity is super important. So what have you learned about being clear, or what advice would you have for someone in terms of being clear? Like, what sort of information would you include, I guess?
So I remember, I don't know, was it whether it was like university or high school, but I had one of the courses was about writing things, writing articles, like specifically like in journalism. And an old habit of most writing journalists was that if you have a topic, you just stick it in front of you, whether you use a computer, typewriter, or you just write it with a pen. Stick it in front of you and look at it. And if there is anything, if any sentence that you put on paper doesn't, that doesn't make sense with this topic, like, remove it, like, forget about it, write it differently. So having said that, it's like, let's say if you write a user story, whether you're a PM or a dev team member, you have to think not just twice, but 3 times, 4 times, whether it actually captures all the things that you needed. If you write acceptance criteria, make sure they touch on all the points that you need afterwards. It's kind of like, it's a universal, it's not a rule, it's like a universal heuristic. It works in if people work on site as well. But the thing is that the consequences of not doing it are far worse if you work remotely, because there is no, like, reading between lines is basically looking at empty blank space in an app, so you cannot feel anything from it. Like, you're not in a conversation with people. So I don't know, like, for me, it's all of those little things that you learn to learn how to write concise sentences. If you use Slack, write messages that are not just don't press enter after each and every message that you put on a channel that has more than 10 people in it. It's a collection of little things that you learn to do that make a difference. When at the end of the day, if you look at how, the overall quality of communication, and like whether people understand what you're doing, that's what makes a difference. Like use, for instance, another thing in Slack, like there are threads. Use threads relentlessly. If you discuss the topic that's related to like if you want to discuss a bigger topic and it's not big enough to create a separate channel, put a thread, say explicitly, this is a thread. If you want to discuss it, go click on it and then continue the discussion there. If it's big enough,
Yeah.
create a channel for it, right? Like, because after that, if anybody wants to get back to it, they will just type whatever
Right.
whatever was the topic. They won't be looking for who wrote it. They won't remember that. So a lot of like hundreds and thousands of different practices that you have to learn and use sufficiently well so that you actually have a comfortable experience.
So, I mean, just to paraphrase, and I think what I like there is two things that stood out. Is the one is almost like keep like information together, or be really deliberate about that. So if there is a thread on a topic, don't introduce new topics into that thread. It's like especially important, as you said, for remote, because like reading, trying to read between all the lines of various topics is like really hard. And then the other one, as you said, is and I really like that, of like be super clear about the thing you want to communicate and use that as your North Star.
Yeah.
Because I think in talking to people about something, because you have the added facial expression, you can see when someone doesn't understand and you can backtrack very easily. Whereas with writing, even if you just veer off topic by a degree with every sentence, by the end of your paragraph, you could have lost someone completely and you won't know, because the only way they can respond is in retrospect.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool piece of advice there as well. And I think, so just to dive, because you were about to talk about like from a team level, what some of your challenges and constraints were. I don't know if you want to pick up there.
So all of those things, we actually had to work through them as a product engineering team.
Right.
All of them were extremely important. They were difficult, and at some point we learned how to, like, a month or and a half through through remote work, we were sort of okay with how things work. Similar thing went with meetings. So like it's a lot easier to, like, and again, it's an obviousness, but like if you do a meeting with everyone in the same room, like it can be a bit chaotic. It can be like the communication goes in many ways at the same time, but you can navigate it because you have a pair of ears that are capable of audio location, so you can pinpoint the source of the sound and it goes somehow. But then if you do use a conference call, like that's all gone. So you have to do it differently. You have to facilitate those meetings better. There has to be a person that actually takes care that if one person speaks, no other people are speaking at the same time. If there's somebody that's silent, that they speak up, so encourage them. On yet another layer, like my favorite thing, and I'm kind of radical about it. Like there is this like collection of memes and jokes about like meetings that should have been an email. And that's a thing, right? That's an actual problem in our work. And a lot of, like, you can say like, okay, you have to have an agenda for a meeting, you have to have like a structure for the discussion, but sometimes that's not enough, because you have to make sure that a meeting is actually for what a meeting is best for, which is conversation. If you have a topic that needs conversation or a debate, you don't have like you might have an agenda, but you know that there is the people that come, they will have to express their point of view, and there is value in doing that synchronously at the same time. Then go for it. If not, figure out something else. So we had multiple examples of that. We started, so like we do refinements if we want to implement something. We refine the product business side of it and then the technical part of it, and we decided that we will kind of have a twofold method of doing that. The first step would be also creating like a scaffold, a proposal, a document, or a sketch of some sort, and then let people show it to everyone and let them look at it in their own time. And then as a last stage, do a meeting where we actually have the conversation. as opposed to like doing all of that during the same session, because that's how we did it before.
Right. So, I mean, just on maybe in both of those examples, actually, like, I feel like you as a product manager have a role to play in encouraging that kind of asynchronous communication to make it effective. So maybe starting with like the meetings example, like, can you take me through your decision-making process? Like, how do you decide if it should be a meeting or an email? And I mean, maybe you can even give an example of something you've just sent as an email or something that you've decided to have a meeting for.
Do I have a decision tree? I don't think so. Or maybe I have, but I'm not aware of it. So yeah, like if you do like with the regular stuff that happens within a product team, so there is a dev team, there is a product manager, we're building something together. You have those rituals, whether you do like you follow Scrum rules or the Scrum guide or any other thing that actually helps with kind of coordinating work and making sure that the team collaborates and enjoys it. You have points in which you can make those decisions. So again, like with new things, let's say we want to implement a new feature. We know the product scope of this feature or the impact on the user and the customer. That's kind of my part. But then I ask the question, guys, we have to make a decision first if it's something that we just implement straight away, because it's not, it's nothing that we haven't been doing before, or the opposite, it's something new and we have to do research and we will have to do like a POC and then move into implementing something inside of our system. So at each of those points, there is a decision to be made also, like to what extent do we need a meeting for it, or to what extent can we handle it with a Google Doc? Actually, with both those things, if you create a Google Doc and then you do a meeting and then you have meeting notes that kind of accompany the whatever was the topic of the document, you kill two birds with one stone, because you will have to do the notes either way if you do a meeting without that prep side. But because you did the preparation and because you shared it before with all the people involved, the conversation itself will be more efficient.
Right.
So, and it's definitely easier if you have a framework. So if you work in Scrum sprints, there is a rhythm indicated by those sprints, and there are certain things that you do each sprint, like sprint planning, backlog grooming in one form or another, retrospectives, daily stand-ups. Those things help because they are kind of the stable part. And then you have to make this. You just make the decisions about the non-standard repertoire. Whereas, like if you do something cross-team or like that spans many departments or many people from many departments, then it's a bit more tricky, because you have to know like which topic are we discussing, and thus like what's the part that we won't be talking about. Can we do a prep? Meaning that can we say that one person or a pair will do a preparation and then we will expand this group and add layers, or we cannot, because if we give it to two people, it will introduce bias, and we don't want bias in this topic. So we have to start with the messy brainstorming session, everyone in the same Hangouts room, right? So for me, those are those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, we've been talking about it, but just to make it a little bit more explicit, like there seems to be the split between some product-related constraints and challenges and some people-related strengths or team-related strengths and challenges. So, I mean, just to sort of close up on the people side for now, like what are some other things that you as a product manager needed to do in terms of like helping the team or supporting the team remotely? Like what are some like particular challenges that you've had to work through over and above the stuff we've spoken about already?
You mean in relation to moving to working remotely?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
like, I don't know if there's specific things around leadership or helping people, like supporting them to do their best
Mhm.
work. Or I think you've spoken as well about safe and inclusive work environments. Like, I don't know if there's things within that field that you had to think about in terms of
Mm.
your approach.
So I'd say I think I've said already that I think a product manager has to be a facilitator.
Yeah.
You have to know your ways in how to make sure people collaborate, how to make sure people are feel safe in like sharing their views, their expertise, their opinions. Listen to like what are they saying and be able to feel if they are like, are they still comfortable, or are we entering a dangerous territory? Should we kind of do a step back, or can we pursue this topic? So you have to
Hmm.
have like a sixth sense of sorts to navigate that. And I think in a remote setting, it's the proportion increases. So you have to be more of that. Again, because like if you don't do those things, you will experience, you as a PM, and you as a member of a team, you will experience consequences which will be much more visible than if you were just sitting in the same room. Again, it's kind of sounds trivial, but when you see those things happening, then you realize that it's not that easy. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, so specifically in product, like those core product PM PM duties, like creating, like I don't know, building. It's not ever like creating just by yourself, but like
Right.
structuring the product vision, making it into create like transforming it into a strategy, and then into something that's operationalized and that can be implemented, let's say. um it's for me, it's a question of style. So like if you see everybody each day, and you're not you're a desk away and not a call away, you have a different repertoire of things that you can do. So you can do a lot of spontaneous conversations, and those spontaneous conversations can have a component of like being advocating for that vision, for that strategy, like introducing bits and pieces of interesting facts about things that you're going to build, and thus like building up the it's never the main way of doing that, because usually the
Sure.
main
Yeah.
part is
Yeah.
like, well, doing a presentation or a discussion about it, or like setting up goals and discussing those goals and how we will measure them, and so on and so forth. But to accompany all that, like if you are with people at the office, you can be more spontaneous about it, and it will usually work. Nah, it gets a bit more difficult, because like it's harder to get a spontaneous conversation. And saying that, I don't want to say that one way is better than the other. They're
For
different.
sure.
I heard that I've been like, when I'm talking about that, I heard that opinion that might not be the best way of doing this, because like the best style is to do, that kind of, lobbying, right? I don't want to say like one is better than the other. For me, the reality is that if you're remote, you have to be much more um synthetic about this. So you cannot have like a main track of communication and then sidetrack it with spontaneous conversations in the kitchen. You have to prepare a pitch that's more impactful right away, and then maybe discuss it and debate it, but in a more structured manner, because it won't happen spontaneously. I mean, sometimes it does, but you cannot be like you cannot take it for granted.
Like, how does that impact your approach to that? I mean, just you hearing you say it needs to be like more synthetic and more structured. I assume like a lot of the stuff that you get out of spontaneous conversation, and this might relate a little bit to what you were saying about like scaffolding.
Hmm.
Like if you're scaffolding a doc, that you like let people look at it before the meeting. It's like instead of just like pitching one big idea, which in remote, because you haven't had all the little tidbits of spontaneous conversation, which often aids that. Like, how do you approach, or how does that change your approach to pitching an idea to the team? Do you is it a really long presentation? Do you try and keep it quite short? Do you maximize time for discussion and questions? What are some of the more like practical approaches to that in terms of your role?
So I'm wondering, so there was like the thing that my team is working on right now is adding some useful things like advanced code completion to the IDE, to the code editor. We always knew that it's something that we want to do, but apart from a very a smaller group of product managers and probably people in the executive team, VP product, VP marketing, they knew that it comes to us as feedback from both candidates and customers. But it's not enough to say, like, to come to your team and say all of a sudden, like, okay, so there is a new priority, we have to start doing it. No questions asked, right? That's not how it works. So I'm fortunate enough to work with a team that they actually made me, like, they asked me, the first thing they asked, like, we want background on this. We want to know why this is important. We want to get from you a summary of, like, if you say candidate feedback, show us the feedback. If you say customer feedback or feedback from the sales process, from prospecting, like, bring us that. Like, we want to see that. We want to understand where does it come from. And it's like, they are amazing, because usually, like, that's like, you should be able to convey that, but you're not asked that question. So they asked me that question, and that's actually one of the cool ways of sparking that discussion and maybe priming people to actually. So usually you would do it like, okay, we have a topic that we will be working on for some time, and then you do a presentation, but then you can do a Q&A and, like, do digressions, and then, like, the digressions add detail. So you have to add detail a different way and in a more structured way, because it won't be as we said, like, it won't be as spontaneous and easy. So again, like, prepare some background, let it be like a 1-pager or a, like, 1 to 3 pages of information. What deals we lost or we won, or where was it mentioned by customers or prospects? Then where sources of feedback? Where do we see? Could it be where do we see the negative impact of not having something? And then why do we need it? And where is the impact? Where is the impact that we want to have while as we introduce it, or after we introduce it to a certain extent? So to summarize, like, this is like dividing between the main goal, drafting the main goal well, but also providing background for it, providing reading material. If somebody's interested, maybe pointing them to some links about this. Why is it important? I mean, in our case, it's like everybody is a software engineer or knows how software is built, so they know, like, auto completion in the editor, what it does, how it helps. Like, it's intuitive for most of the people in our teams, for instance. But in other cases, not all the things. Like, on the talent acquisition side, for instance, if we build something for the talent acquisition side, even though we are a product that is HR tech, it's not obvious what things do they need, what goals do they accomplish by using certain features. So that's, again, you have to give a background about who is using it, what's the persona, what's their goals, how does it work in big and small companies, what's the difference, right? And then, like, how do we want to, like, what goal, what thing do we want to achieve, what's the theme that we're actually, the mission that we're pursuing, and then you can open the discussion, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to tie this back to a thread, or pull on a thread you mentioned earlier, like, between having a meeting and sending an email, this idea of, like, you can probably write out the background to the meeting in a couple pages and let someone read that before, as opposed to making them sit through 10 minutes of you talking in a meeting. Like, that doesn't have to be something you say. That's something they can read, which actually gives you more time for engaged discussion when you do the pitch. And a lot of that, I assume, you would normally achieve with spontaneous discussion, because people will pick up bits of the background. So normally in if you're co-located, that sort of is less important
Mhm.
to front load in the meeting, because a lot of that will have been contextual or situational. But then actually giving that reading material beforehand
Mhm.
gives
Yeah.
you more time in the meeting.
Yeah. If you think of
And
it, it could perfectly work in a co-located setting. There's nothing
right,
that would actually say that would actually make it like not relevant, right? It's
yeah,
just that you have a chance of like transmitting that different ways spontaneously,
yeah,
water cooler conversations and so on. And
yeah,
here, not so much.
yeah.
Actually, there was an interesting case I've been discussing about with somebody, and that was about presentations, because there is
Hmm.
there is different type there is presentations and presentations. Like there is different types of presentations for different purposes. And if your objective is to read slides and transmit some, let it be background knowledge or additional or main like information about something, but just read it and communicate it, send an email, send a Slack message, post a Google Doc. But
Yeah,
if the goal of the presentation is to inspire people to scratch their heads about something, and you're able to do that with your presentation. So, in other words, it's not about reading the slides, but it's about telling a story that wouldn't have the same effect if you just posted it in a piece of text. Then go for a presentation.
To your earlier point, this is super important in and out of remote
Yeah.
settings, but particularly important in remote settings where the inspiration that you would normally get by being in the same room as people, you now need to somehow achieve in other ways. So I really like, to your point of not having a decision-making tree, I would call that part of your decision-making tree. So that's
Yeah,
definitely
it definitely
something you can
is.
add.
I'm just not.
Yeah,
I'm not consciously, following this
yeah.
tree.
And then just on a product point, is there anything we've not spoken about in terms of product challenges in a remote setting? I don't know if there was anything else around that you wanted to still add or weigh in on.
Mm, so there is an interesting, it's a different aspect. It's not just product; it's also company business strategy and company strategy, and it's something that we experienced heavily as Codility and as a business that works in tech hiring. And so when the pandemic started, it was a challenge. Not just it was a challenge for us on many fronts, not just on the front of actually having to move to a remote setting ourselves, but also dealing with the uncertainties, the insecurity of like the volatility of the market, the job market, the things that the companies did, like whether you're doing layoffs or hiring freezes, or how do like we were just in the middle of it. And as a product used for hiring, that was a big that was a big
Sure.
hit for us. It ended up better than we supposed it would, but like at first it was a hit. It was a surprise. It was something totally unpredicted, and we had to do something about it. So one of the things, like half of the story was adapting to this reality ourselves with our daily work. The other half of it was changing the direction a bit. And I think from the product perspective, that's the most notable part. So um we kind of like before, when we were looking at the needs of what companies need in terms of technical assessments and
Yeah.
screening, assessing technical skills, we were thinking about a variety of things, not just hiring, not just recruitment, but also upskilling, trainings, self training. So kind of like going into the direction of courses and lessons for certain topics. um, and after the pandemic hit, we, like, after a lot of research, analysis, discussions, we made a decision that the thing that, like, the sole fact that some companies are laying off a lot of engineers, some companies are
Yeah.
freezing hiring, it means that after we get up from it, or after the market and the people and the societies and like the politicians, everybody actually will
For
get
sure.
used to it, because we will have to, like, that's what we were thinking, like we will have to get used to this situation. It will be with us for quite some time. Then we realized that we have to double down on recruitment. We have to make sure that in this reality where a remote, like for instance, a remote interviewing tool, it's not just an auxiliary part of the interview process. It becomes the main stage of everything. We have to make sure
Right.
that we can satisfy that need. So also, like, doing homework tasks and homework assignments to see if you can code in this and that technology and use this and that framework. It used to be the screening stage. Uh, Now it will be much more important, because you won't see the
Yeah.
candidates in person, right? If you're a company that you worked remotely before, like, you're not scared about it. But if you're not, if you have to, like, you have to continue hiring people, you have to have, continue with, your endeavors that you had as a
Yeah.
big company, small company, an enterprise, a startup. You have to be able to do that, but without seeing them face to face, without like all of those things that you could do during an interview, like using a whiteboard on the wall, or a piece of paper, or a computer that you just put on the table. Like, you have to rely on whatever the candidate has at the point of the interview. So all of those things, they contribute to the shift in the strategy that we did. And that was like double down on recruiting remotely, making sure that tech hiring remotely is efficient, and like, it gives all the signal and all the information about the candidates to the companies they are applying for, but also it gives the best experience possible to the candidates themselves, because they will also receive additional, they will be like, a job interview is already stressful, and now you cannot see you can see the person, but they're just a small square on your computer screen, right? You
Right.
don't see the body language, you have
Yeah.
no idea, like, all the indirect ways of communicating with, like, human being to human being. You cannot see that. it's
Yeah.
it's 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 significantly impaired. So we have to make sure that we are good on all the other fronts, and we give the experience that actually is comfortable for them, that
Yeah.
works with what they know, that they can show their skills and feel good about it.
Yeah.
um
So what did that shift require from you as a product manager? What did that
mm,
need in terms of, yeah, your approach to some of the stuff you were doing?
So for my team, it was a 180 turn, 180 degree turn on what we were doing. So before that moment, before that shift in the company strategy, we were predominantly working on making the task creation pipeline more efficient, making sure that the task authors better tools that work better, that work kind of one to one with what we have on the platform, that the process of launching tasks to our production environment is I don't want to say, well, effortless. Yes, it should be at some point. It's not yet there, but it's like it's faster, it's easier, it works with the task author and not against the task author.
Hmm.
uh, and we did some things about that, but then we actually had to shift totally, because we shifted to the candidate side, and
Yeah.
we said, okay, so we have to do something about what's the experience of interacting with Codility as a candidate, and
Yeah.
we have to start investing in at that environment that they see and they use when they start recruitment in using Codility. um, because that will be the make it or break it in terms of, whether people feel comfortable being interviewed remotely, being assessed remotely. um, So yeah, it was like it was like a domain shift. We basically had to like change this. We were moving within the same realm of similar stakeholders still. As a team that does a core part of the assessment, we have to kind of have like a very strong root there.
Yeah.
But we had to learn new things about totally different people, totally different users,
Yeah.
different technical solutions, services that we have to implement on the on the other end of the system, like so to speak.
Yeah. So I mean, if someone also had to go through a domain shift or is currently going through a domain shift, what is like one piece of advice or principle you'd suggest as like a starting point, like where to start in that entire process? Do you focus on like speaking to other teams? Do you focus on speaking to users? Like, what is like a good first step there, and why?
So the answer is a bit like it depends, because if
Or rather, like, what worked for you? Like, where did you start?
in this situation it was a strategic shift. This means
Right.
that it came from feedback, the observations of the market, the observations of like how companies hire or not hire people. Are they doing layoffs? Are they freezing the recruitment? But at the end of the day, such a decision is pretty subjective. Like, it's a bet that you play. It's an informed bet that you place on a very strategic level. So you basically don't say, yeah, we should have X, Y, and Z by that time. Like, you don't know that yet, but you just know that. So in our case, it was like there will be a moment when the when this whole situation related to COVID will either ease out, or we will get more used to it. Seems like it's the latter. And we will have to react to that, and there is potential there, because there will be a lot of, like, even if the total volume of hiring on the whole job market for engineers will be smaller, the candidate pool will be 10x the the volume that you've seen, that you saw before that moment. And just because of that, we want to be ready for it. So again, it's a strategic decision, but having, like, if you make such a decision as a company and as a product organization, what I think you should follow it up with is making sure that you still can connect the dots in terms of how do you make an impact on your part, on either your part of the system or the new part of the system, either your old domain or the new domain or the shifted one, like whatever the circumstances you're in. Think about connecting those dots. How do you make an impact there? How can you have an idea of whether after introducing something new you actually made an impact or not? Make sure on the team level, on the product team level, your product team level, make sure everybody understands the background, so the reasoning, both of the strategic decisions, so the foundations, like where does it come from, this piece of reasoning about, like, there will be much more candidates, like much less position but much more candidates, which will pose a challenge to all the hiring teams out there, and that's what Codility is for, so let's go for it, right? So make sure that everybody gets this way of thinking. Make sure there is data that illustrate it somehow, even if it's not perfect, like even if it's like, it might be bits and pieces from here and there, but just put as much as you can and as many pieces as you can in this kind of background piece, background talk or document or whatever form you prefer, and then make sure, like, yeah, we want to make an impact, we want to do something about it. Make sure that people feel they're doing it right. And if you feel that you're not making an impact, or somebody like one of the team members says, I'm not sure if we're making an impact here, be serious about it and listen to them, right? Listen to them. Make sure it's either like you will have a very inspiring conversation with them and they will kind of get a bigger picture, or even better, they will change your mind and you will start doing something else, but with much bigger potential.
Right. And how does your team measure impact?
Oh, so it depends on depends on the area. So I think I said somewhere at the beginning that this year we have a team, an internal goal to grow my team and to eventually divide into 2 separate teams, and those 2 teams we haven't done the exact split of responsibilities yet. We want to do that one when we have all the team members in place, and we can have a discussion, a conversation about it. But there have always been 2 areas in which we work as a kind of core platform team, core assessment team. And those were first the task creation side. So all the tasks that are in our library, they need tools to be developed. They need testing suites. We have to make sure that those testing suites are put into pipelines where you actually can, you deploy the task and it goes through the tests and you get meaningful feedback out of it. So that's one of it. And the impact you do there is either you save time on some of those stages, or you create some tools that work better. They are easier. So you rely on the feedback that comes from the authors and from the task community. And on the other side, when it comes to, so it's a bit more tricky, and I still it will be a challenge for me, for the product organization in general, and for my team to figure out what's the best way of measuring it, because we know this other part is about candidate experience and making sure they feel the editor, they see the editor feels right. They feel they have all the tools they need to perform, do a challenge, code something, run it, and see how it works. They have flexibility in terms of what style of work do they do, and sometimes it defines the job position. So say a web developer uses a different way. It's they will use a traditional IDE, for instance, whereas if you hire for more of a an development operations oriented role, site reliability engineers, for instance, they don't do that. Of course, they use editors for configuration files, for configuration management, but then there's this whole part of interacting with an environment, with services, launching them, putting them in containers, and launching them in those containers, and then scaling horizontally, vertically, all of those things. You do it with different interfaces. So that's a challenge, and that's something that we have to we haven't yet operationalized, other than saying, yes, this is candidate experience, this is that will be the goal, improving that will be the goal, but finding not just the very lagging indicators, which is the feedback that we get from candidates. We have a survey at the end of each test, for instance. So you can say what was your experience with this Codility test, or what was your general experience with Codility today? But that's that comes after a time. So we have to figure out those smaller things that fall in, they contribute to this bigger thing. We have some ideas. It's not done yet. So that will be an interesting challenge as well.
Yeah. So what I like is the measuring impact thing, I think is ties back to, I can imagine the risk with a domain shift like that in a remote setting is it's quite a stressful or demotivating thing potentially, because you sort of have to shift your priorities, change your roadmaps. But by measuring impact consistently, you can actually feel like what you're doing is making a difference, or actually or not making a difference. But then you have a better gauge of that as a team.
Yeah.
Also probably helps with direction and priority in general as well.
I completely agree. Sometimes even if you're not if you don't have that you don't have the exact way of measuring things, not everything is easy to measure, especially with human interaction, and making the connection between whether a certain type of interaction tells you something more. It's with assessing skills, right? Being able to solve a task, does it tell anything else about your skills, or it's just about solving this particular task? Same thing with user behavior. Is this behavior just the behavior itself, or does it contribute to a change somewhere else, or does it have an impact somewhere else? So even if you're not able to measure that precisely, or you're not able to measure that at all at a given moment, having the connection of those dots always present somewhere, and like being able to bring it up, whether it's a discussion within your dev team, or it's across teams, or it's with the team talking with the executives or the executive team leadership. On all those fronts, I think having those dots connected helps.
Yeah.
The more data driven, the better, right? But even if like you have a very good solid reasoning where you think the impact will be, that's a good enough to start.
Super cool. I mean, that's been a really interesting delve or exploration of your world at Codility, and as like senior product manager at for a remote team in a remote setting. So thanks so much for indulging.
Thank you.
Just as a last and closing point, what is a piece of real world advice, either related to product management or not, but a real world piece of advice that you think people should ignore?
Well, it's not. I don't know. There's a lot of things like that. Again, it can be anything. It depends on the context. Like,
sure.
Without the context, it's hard to say. But I think like if somebody says things should be done a certain way, and they say it as, this is a common practice, believe in it. I'm not saying you should reject this as a piece of advice, but always try to question it. There is I mean,
that is a beautiful answer. Like, what piece of real world advice is potentially everything, depending on the context.
Yeah.
So be really critical of it.
Yeah. So be mindful of the context, and don't be afraid of questioning it, which is actually, I'm giving advice right now. That's not a good answer.
So take this with a pinch of salt as well.
Yeah. But if somebody gives you advice that they are 100% sure of and they are not critical of it, like, don't take it, or at least question it.
Cool. Jan, thanks so much for your insights and experience. It was really fun chatting to you, and thanks so much for taking the time to share your journey and your lessons in this. It's really
cool.
really
likewise
cool to hear.
Cool.